The streets of Wesselton were stirring as Hans and his companions were attacked by 4 casually dressed men. Hans jumped back as the dagger-wielding man lunged forward, narrowly missing the young prince with the tip of his blade. Ingrid managed to free herself from the grasp of one of the men and reverse his hold on her. She grabbed him by the collar of his shirt and placed one leg in front of his as she twisted her body and used the leverage to slam her attacker onto the ground. Ingrid released the man as he hit the ground and twisted around so she was now facing the same direction as Hans. She reached her arm forward and pulled the prince behind her, placing herself between Hans and the knife. Meanwhile, Anders had subdued his assailant by locking arms with the man and slamming his head into the bandit's forehead. Anders then turned his attention to Lars, who was currently being held around the neck by one of the 2 standing attackers. "Lars!" Hans yelled as he noticed his brother being attacked by one of the bandits. "Don't worry, kid," Ingrid said calmly. "Lars is going to be just fine." She locked eyes with the dagger-wielding bandit. "You should probably put that knife down before somebody gets hurt." The man with the blade was visibly shaken by how calm Anders and Ingrid both appeared to be, but after a second he managed to still his trembling hand. He took a deep breath and then shouted as he lunged forward with the tip of the knife heading straight toward Ingrid. Elsa's royal officer didn't hesitate. She stepped slightly to her left as she used her right hand to guide the attacker's arm to the right side of her body. She continued to use the attacker's momentum and kept guiding him forward until he was beside her. Ingrid then grabbed the man's other arm and locked it behind his back. She put a bit of pressure on his twisted arm as she told him to drop the weapon. The bandit complied almost immediately, dropping the dagger, which Ingrid caught before placing the blade against the man's stomach. Ingrid turned her attention to the assailant who was still holding on to Lars. "You should probably put my friend down before somebody else gets hurt," Anders chuckled. "I'd listen to her. She clearly does not like your pal here," he said as he pointed to the man Ingrid was restraining. The man holding on to Lars began to loosen his grip. Lars took the opportunity to slip out of his hold and he quickly stepped away from him. Anders stepped toward the attacker, who was practically quivering. "Please stop," he yelled. "It wasn't our fault." "What wasn't your fault? You attacked us," Anders responded. The man dropped down to his knees. "Please forgive us. The Duke offered to pay off my family's debt." Hans stepped forward as he remembered the kitchen worker that the Duke had used to get him inside the castle of Arendelle. "What did the Duke pay you to do?" "What do you mean, Hans? You trust this guy?" Ingrid asked. Hans scoffed. "Huh, no, I don't trust him, but I believe him. I've seen the Duke use debts to get men to do horrid things in the past." Hans looked to the floor. "I'm pretty sure I was one of those people, actually." "Please, I beg you," the man said, now pleading with Hans. "We were supposed to take you back to him by any means necessary. I'm sorry, please don't hurt us." Anders placed his hand on Hans' shoulder as he stepped forward. "We aren't gonna hurt you, but in return, we need you to do something for us," he said. "Anything. I'll do anything," replied the groveling man. "You're going to go back to the Duke and tell him that you chased the young prince and his brother out of town, but you couldn't catch them, okay?" Anders said as he crouched down to meet the man at eye level. The young man on the ground nodded his head to confirm that he would do as he was told. "Anders, they're never going to believe that," Ingrid said as she loosened her grip on the bandit she was holding. "They don't need to believe it. We just need to buy a little bit of time to hide until nightfall," Anders responded. "Now let his friend go and the 2 will run back to the little Duke and tell him that they lost us on the outskirts of town, right?" He looked back at their 2 assailants. "As for your friends here, let them sleep this off in the streets." He pointed at the 2 on the ground. The 2 men scurried toward the Duke's manor as fast as they could, and as soon as it was clear, Hans and Lars began guiding the royal guards through the alleyways as they headed toward the Cobblestone Inn, where Hans was certain they could hide safely for a few hours. The path to the inn was mostly clear until they were about 2 groups of buildings away from it. That was when they noticed a single pair of guards sitting outside one of the nicer taverns with steins in their hands. "Looks like they won't be paying attention to us if we act casually," Lars whispered to the group. Hans looked at the guards and then back at Lars. "No, we can't go that way. We'd have to pass right by them to get to the inn. Let's just go around." "No, your brother's right, kid," Ingrid responded. "By the looks of the redness in their faces, they've been here for a while and won't be in the right state of mind to notice anyone in a crowd." Hans looked back at the 2 guards and then at Lars. "Trust us. Just stick with the crowds and don't stand out," Anders said as he started to move into the street. The group slowly began to meld into one of the slightly larger crowds that were walking down the street past the two guards. Hans was on the side closest to the pair at the tavern as they continued walking, and he couldn't help but overhear a portion of their boisterous conversation. "I can't believe I missed that," one guard said to the other before hiccuping. "Do you think they'll make her use her ice powers again?" The other guard snickered before responding. "Not in those chains. They're not going to let her out for a long time." Hans' eyes widened and his eyebrows dropped into a scowl. "Did you hear that?" He grimaced through his teeth. "Yeah," Anders responded quietly. "This isn't good. Let's just get to the inn and then we'll figure this out." The rest of the journey to the Cobblestone Inn was made in silence and without delay. The group quickly made it to the front door and then inside, where they were greeted by Agatha, who looked happy to see Hans and the group. "Hello, dears," she called to them as she waved at Hans. Hans waved back as he replied, "Hello, ma'am. I hope you don't mind. I brought some extra guests with me." Agatha laughed. "Oh, not at all. Let me know if you need anything." The group quickly made their way back toward Hans' room, and as soon as the door closed, Hans turned to Anders and Ingrid. "What do you think they meant?" he asked. "Because it sounds to me like they have the Queen's captive in the Duke's manor," he quietly shouted. "Calm down, little brother," Lars suggested. "I know this sounds bad, but I'm sure that we'll be able to figure something out, right?" he asked as he turned toward the two guards. "Of course we will. They're our queens. Nothing will happen to them, but we are all going to have to play our parts," Anders started to explain to the two brothers. "So listen up." Hans and Lars nodded simultaneously. "When night comes, the two of us," Anders said as he pointed to himself and Ingrid, "are going to go back to the ship and report what we've learned to the commander. If I know him like I think I do, he's going to take the ship back to Arendelle to bring the entire fleet to the Duke's doorstep." "The entire fleet?" Hans asked with a surprised tone in his voice. "Yes, which is going to take some time. If we're lucky and we make it to the commander soon enough to depart tonight, then the fleet could be here in as little as 2 days." Ingrid continued Anders' explanation. 2 days, Lars chimed in. "This is where you two come in," Ingrid said. "We need you to figure out a way into the Duke's manor." Hans and Lars looked at each other, both thinking to themselves, how is that going to be possible? "Even if you can't free the queens, you must get them the message that Arendelle is coming for them." Anders took a step forward and looked at Hans. "You've changed a lot since the first day we caught you in the castle. We wouldn't be giving you this responsibility if we didn't think you could do it, kid. This is your chance to rewrite your story, you know? Like one of those books you're always reading." Hans smiled at Anders and Ingrid and simply nodded in acceptance. "I'll do everything I can." Lars' eyes were now locked onto his little brother. Did he say reading? Could Hans have really changed this much? Hans saw that Lars was staring at him and asked, "Is everything okay?" Lars chuckled. "Of course it is. We can do this, little brother." Hans nodded and the group spent the rest of the day talking over possible ways into Wesselton Manor. By the time the sun fell from the sky and the moon had risen, Ingrid and Anders said their farewells and swiftly made their journey through town back to their ship to inform Commander Reynolds about the queens. The next morning, Queen Elsa was surprised to hear the large door at the top of the dungeon staircase open, and even more surprised to see the Duke of Wesselton walk down by himself. "What's this, no backup?" Elsa said sarcastically. The Duke laughed. "Backup? For me?" He continued to chuckle. "Oh dear, or should I say, Queen?" Elsa glared at the Duke. The chain began to rattle when she slowly rose to her feet. "Call me what you want, but when I'm out of here, you will be the Duke of Nothing." "When you get out of here," the Duke said mockingly, "who do you think is going to help you, Prince Hans?" Elsa's eyes widened as she realized that the Duke knew about Hans. "Oh, you didn't think I knew about him?" he asked. "Trust me, witch, I know more than you think. Your little puppet was chased out of town by my men, which is lucky for him because I would not have been as kind as you if I had captured him." The Duke smiled at Elsa. "As for your ship, it seems to have left port last night." Elsa's eyes widened. "What? No." "Oh yes, Your Majesty," the Duke sneered. "There is no one coming for you." He slowly turned to make his way back up the stairs as he added, "Or your sister." Elsa slowly walked backward until her back pressed against the wall. She dropped down to a seated position and clutched her knees. "I can't be alone. Not again." she thought to herself as water began to pool in the corners of her eyes.